Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where frontline sales leaders teach you how to build and scale an outbound sales team. Welcome back to another edition of the live Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your co-host, Collin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by best-selling author of Predictable Revenue, Aaron Ross, and a guy whose middle name, our next guest, his middle name is SDR. He's been building SDR teams since 97, or maybe even before 97. We'll get into that later. You might know him as the VP of Global Development at Cloudera, but now he's the CEO of SalesSource. Welcome to the show, Lars Nilsson.
I appreciate that. And hey, jag Sverige. That's a call out to my Swedish football team in Russia.
Beautiful. Want to jump in. How did you get the name SDR? How'd you get the middle name SDR?
Well, that may be one of the first times I've heard that. Certainly, I've heard ADR back in 1997 when I was working for then a small venture-backed startup called Portal Software. I built a team of 5, and at the time, it was called telemarketing. And they were telemarketing reps, but we were doing not only inbound lead triage and follow-up, we were, overlaid to quota-carrying account executives, and they were having us do some cold outreach into their target accounts. And I just remember one day my team coming to me and saying, Lars, I know it says telemarketing on our business cards, but we feel we're doing a lot more than that. Can we change our name? And again, that's what everyone was called back then. And I said, yeah, we're a startup. We can do whatever we want. So we grabbed, some drinks and some pizzas, and we got into a room. And about 4 hours later, we had whiteboarded lead development rep, account development rep, business development rep, and sales development rep. And the team chose account development. And that was in 1997. And it felt great to kind of have our own name for things that we felt we were doing, which was developing accounts, target accounts for our quota-carrying sales counterparts.
Right on.
Anyway, just to close it off, since then, I've been iterating on the ADR, SDR model for 20 years. And maybe that's the reason, Collin. I don't know.
And Aaron, you ended up that's a great story. Obviously predates me. Aaron, I know you settled on, or Salesforce had settled on, is it enterprise development rep initially?
Actually, EBR. Enterprise Business Representative. Again, a little bit of marketing, trying to elevate the value of the, I don't think the team was. I think I came up with that just along the way, just to give it a name. You don't want to be called like a telemarketing rep, or you want to try to elevate the value of marketing. Yeah, enterprise business representative. I don't think it ever made it out of Salesforce, but I don't know if actually what they're called there today, if it's changed or not.
And so what's the origin of sales development rep or business development rep?
Well, sales development rep, I think, was just around, and it just became more of a, like a generic term. So people get confused. There's ADR, BDR, SDR. So at the time I did Predictable Revenue, I just picked SDR for, I think that was really more the outbound role, and market response rep for the inbound, because try to pick some terms that were at least self-descriptive. But now everyone calls them SDRs. So today, I talk about inbound SDRs and outbound SDRs because they are different. Sometimes they get lumped too often. They should be different. And that's just like the common terminology now.
Because in some companies have all-bound SDRs where they do both inbound and outbound?
Probably. I've heard all-bound. And, once in a while that can make sense. Usually it doesn't.
It's for me, that's actually the first time I've heard all-bound. I've heard hybrid. For me, back in the day when Trish Bertuzzi and Craig Rosenberg of the Bridge Group and Topo, respectively, started to, publish their best practices, that's the first time I heard the term sales development rep, and we're probably talking about 10 years ago. And I know today, when I hear LDR, BDR, ADR, SDR, I still think of relatively the same thing, right? It's a non-quota carrying, non-discrete quota carrying role that has been put in to either manage inbound leads, triage, research, follow up, and qualify them, or start to generate colder outbound motions to do the same thing, but to do it in a very controlled and deliberate way for target personas at target accounts. And I think that's where a lot of the kind of differences. Inbound, you can't control as much what is coming in, other than, if you begin to prioritize and score and route. But the outbound motions of today, have followed the account-based marketing, account-based sales development methodologies that are out there. And I think one of the reasons why we're starting to hear a lot of companies talk about outbound is because of this focused kind of targeted approach where you can get your company's message to the right person at the right company, and more even today at the right time. There are signals and there's things going out there in the marketplace that you can tune into that can make that can present accounts to you without even targeting. I think that's kind of the real exciting part of this is the technology that's available to SDRs today. And I think why they deserve really good management, really good enablement, to help, get these motions, outbound motions, in place.
Totally agree. One question there, one uneducated question. As we move more account-based, does that, because you're targeting specific accounts, does it maybe change your stance on, whether the SDR should be inbound or outbound or both? If it's their account, does it matter, where it comes from, whether it's an outbound motion or an inbound motion?
I'll start and then I'll hand over to Aaron. I think that when a company is just getting funding and getting off the ground, they're in the new logo hunt for anything and anyone that will spend money on their product. And I think you have to operate like that for a while. But I think you have to be very careful and conscious of, when the right time is to put some time into understanding what your target addressable market and what an ideal customer profile looks like to you. And I think the sooner you can get to that, then the sooner you can identify that that constituency of accounts that your marketing team can now begin to target to get the messages out to. I know that at my last company, Cloudera, we may have spent a little too long in the new logo hunting part. We got to a place where we began to see some of our, lower value customers churn. And it wasn't until we started taking a look under the covers and understanding why they churned to realize that, they didn't have as much pain for our solution. They didn't have the expertise in-house to operate. And so they churned. And it helped us understand that our TAM was actually, in the Fortune 5,000 versus the Fortune 10,000. And that was a pretty big realization for us. And it allowed us to focus more of our efforts on a smaller subset of companies, but more importantly, the personas within those.
Yeah. Also stepping back, I think what you'll see is that every fast-growing, think about any company that you assume was like the best inbound company ever, right? That could be Google, it could be Facebook, it could be Slack, it could be HubSpot or Marketo, right? Every company at some point does outbound if they sell to businesses. Every company. Facebook is doing outbound now, right? If Facebook's doing outbound, so what you realize is that inbound and outbound do not mix. They don't mix. They don't mix if you're targeting big companies for the same person, right? So if I'm one person And I can't do inbound and outbound effectively, even if I'm the one ASDR, ADR, BDR, ZDR for Ford. It doesn't work, right? Because there's different rhythms. Now, if I'm an outbound prospector and I'm getting, like, if inbound leads are a very small percent of my day, 5 or 10%, yeah, okay. If there's only one SDR at the company, yeah, you have to juggle. But you don't get massive results until you have people who are dedicated to that outbound role. Because again, it's different rhythms, it's different metrics, it's different actions. There's too much difference. And so it's almost impossible for people to juggle both. The one more exception could be if you have very simple sales and very simple conversations, and sort of marketing or the company is doing a lot of the initial outbound preparation. And so they're just trying to deliver outbound responses, appointments to the same person. And then it's almost like they're doing inbound. That's the one time it can work, but that's pretty rare.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think today, more than ever, we have options to try one or the other, right? Today, we even have automated options on the inbound, right? There are companies that can automatically look at, prioritize, score, and even respond back to all automatically. There's now companies virtualizing a lot of the different outbound motions that an SDR would take. On the inbound side, I've heard of a company called Outbound Automated. I've heard of Outbound Works. And so I think companies today, instead of trialing SDRs on the inbound and outbound, they can trial, automated ways of doing it to figure out whether or not they should invest in a dedicated team to do either. I do a lot of work with a local venture capital firm, True Ventures, and I'm presented with founders that will come to me with, and they do legitimately have a too many inbound lead problem. They did a really good job of, getting the awareness of their product out, and they need help putting processes and technology around filtering just the right ones to get through. And other founders that don't even have a website but still need to get the word out. And so sometimes I prescribe, let's start with 2 SDRs just doing inbound. And other times it will be, there are no inbound, start with 2 SDRs and just do outbound. But my advice is always never start a team with just one person. Always start it with 2, and then iterate very quickly from there, and make decisions on how you grow the team, how you enable the team. And I think the unsung hero in this entire kind of stack and the role of the SDR is the SDR frontline manager. I've seen in the last 5 years, my profile of hiring has gone from people with 3 to 5 years experience to people with 0 to 1, maybe 2 years of experience. And the profile of the younger in their career SDR they need good management, and they need coaching, and they need mentorship. And so I rotated pretty heavily on making sure that I had a management team that could create a culture for the SDRs and keep them focused and develop them into sales professionals. So I think that's another piece that I realized in my 5 years of doing about a 60-person SDR team. That was probably one of the most important pieces that represented itself after I failed. But anyway.
Sort of on that note, if coaching is getting harder, or maybe it's getting more and more challenging, to find and train good coaches, is now a great time for AI to come around and take over all of, inbound and outbound.
Yeah.
Aaron, that one?
No, it's sort of like driving, AI will take over some things. Actually, driving be easier. But AI, a few weeks ago we had Drift on, and there's AI. Everything's AI now, right? It's like everything else. It'll help take over some of the low-level automated, things that they shouldn't be doing. They're just kind of a pain in their butts. stock maybe be responsive, or versus like, I don't want to call it fake AI, but I don't know if it matters. There's always going to be a place.
I'm going to go ahead and jump in.
There's always going to be a place for humans in sales. They'll just evolve.
Yeah, Aaron, your internet got a bit choppy for a second there.
Hey, Collin, I'll jump in, and again, I've profiled some of the AI quote unquote companies out there that are whether it's conversation automation, recording, as a way to help both account execs and SDRs understand and their managers to help guide them away from or to certain sentiments, certain parts of the sales pitch. But I think good old-fashioned mentorship of sales reps, right? If a sales rep has been overlaid an SDR, I'm going to expect and I'm going to help enable and train and inspire that account executive to spend time with that younger in their sales career salesperson. I think some of the best coaching comes from AEs that understand maybe they were in that role before, and they're going to take this younger in their career salesperson under their wing, and they're going to include them on their not just first calls, but second and third calls, and they're going to help develop them and inspire them and make them better. I think that's where some of the best kind of management and coaching happens, when you align an SDR to an outside team that cares. But there's always, there's three types of reps: the ones who care, that will take an SDR under their wing, help guide them; the people that they might care, but they just don't have the time and they don't know how. And then there's that rep that just doesn't care. And whether they're a peacock or they're an eagle or whatever, they treat the SDR more as an administrator, and hey, can you run a contract back at headquarters for me? That is what I can't stand, and they're still out there. But if I can help inspire account execs to care as much as the SDR manager, and helping grow these young, talented, budding salespeople, then I think we're there. I have not yet implemented any of that AI that a lot of people are talking about, so I can't speak specifically. But good old-fashioned, management and mentorship from great, managers and account execs that care, I think is a great thing.
So even if you could, it almost sounds like, the incremental value you'd get by saving on a little bit of labor, you're almost undercutting your whole workforce, because the SDRs are the future of the organization in terms of account execs, and allowing your account execs to move up into larger roles.
Yeah, I think you have to, every company, obviously everything's different. It all depends. But I mean, at a lot of the companies that I've been at that have, have gone through hyper growth, what started as an SDR team originally ended up getting to the point where I found other holes to fill in the organization I was helping build. And that was, we had quota-carrying outside sales reps and we had SDRs. But within a year or two, I found a need to create a quota-carrying inside sales role. And that was very much a natural progression from an SDR into a quota-carrying ISR that maybe carried a smaller quota for, a product that could be sold over the phone. And then there's other roles like, renewals rep. If churn and renewals are something that your company has, if they have a land and expand, and renewal strategy, that could also be a role that you could dedicate as you grow and scale. And again, it's about specialization. Yes, we need to specialize inbound and outbound SDRs, very different motions. The same with ISRs, the same with renewal reps, the same with enterprise class account execs. And I think specialization has to happen at the right time in companies that are, going through hyper growth.
Right on. Aaron, anything to add?
No, I just reemphasize, I think that the coaching hands-on coaching and mentoring by someone in the company, a leader plus the salespeople, makes all the difference for most of the SDRs. And they usually don't get enough of it or for long enough. You probably have to coach them for at least 6 weeks, relatively regularly. It could be longer, if they're brand new and the process is new. But I think at least 6 weeks of daily coaching, checking in, and that's one reason why when you have an outbound prospector, they really shouldn't support more than 4 salespeople, because when they support too many, they get scattered. They don't get the same kind of investment from their salesperson. It's sort of like the same idea of specialization, right? If they're trying to do too many things, cover too many territories, too many different salespeople, they get spread too thin. And that relationship, or even worse, is if they're in a pooling situation, right? There's 4 outbound SDRs supporting 20 salespeople. So do not do that. Inbound, it's possible. Inbound different, but that relationship between a prospector and the salespeople is really important and vital for them to be successful, not just in the mentoring of that prospector, but in the communication around knowing the kinds of targets they like, how they want their appointments set, feedback from them, being able to sit on their calls, like everything that goes into that. It makes a huge difference in ramping an SDR, making it successful.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. I know that, they're the two, I'd say, sales development analyst advisory firms out there, and that's, Topo and the Bridge Group. If you look at their kind of state of the SDR yearly report, I think they talk about the average density model for an enterprise class sale is, 1 SDR for every give or take 3 reps. That's what the average is. Ideal, I would say that there are people that would advocate for 1 to 2, maybe 1 to 2.5. I think 1 to 4, 1 to 5, it's too, it gets watered down, and you could do yourself more harm. I've actually seen, there's a company down in Santa Barbara called Procore that has kind of reversed it. They have 1.3 or 1.4 SDRs for every sales rep, and they have seen a growth trajectory that I've actually never seen before, and they're using the SDR motion to their advantage. So I think that the density model, and again, it depends on the product and the average selling price and the average sales cycle, but 1 to 2 is something that I was striving for back at Cloudera. I never got there. I got to 1 to 3, but we made it extremely efficient.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of variables, because if you have good inbound, you can set too many appointments up for the salespeople, right? And because if a salesperson can only take, whether it's inbound or outbound, 10 appointments a month or 20, again, as an enterprise. So you can overstaff or understaff. So it's like you're just trying to figure out how do you keep your salespeople busy. And with that mix of inbound, outbound, what's the right balance? It's like a symphony, and how do you get all the right pieces to play together the right way? And so that you're trying to maximize whether it's your growth rate or your profitability. I mean, those are also affected as well. Like SalesSource always wanted to maximize growth rate, so their profitability has always been poor. But so it's all those levers you're trying to change.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great analogy of the symphony. I'm curious, Aaron, the role of sales operations in the last 5 to 10 years has just become hugely prominent, because it's that group, and also marketing operations, or revenue operations now, as a lot of people's calling it. They're coming in with the technology, they're coming in with the metrics, and they're coming out with the reports and dashboards that are showing all this. Back when you were building out your team at SalesSource, was it you that was providing all of these, or were you working with a really talented operations team that helped you create this picture?
Yeah. Well, even in the mid 2000s at SalesSource, they had sales ops. Maybe one of the first companies, but there's always been a place for that. I'm glad to see that it's become more prominent because I ended up doing all the reporting and metrics for the Outbound team at SalesSource. And I tell all the executives or whoever's leading teams, if you use Salesforce, you really should be comfortable and learn how to use dashboards so you can get the metrics you want whenever you want them. And sales ops there was really more on the more complicated, at that point, changing Salesforce fields or comp. They cover territories, comp, like all the complexities for the sales team, of which there are many more than for the SDR team. Like, again, territory management, right? Is there anything that's more of a pain in the ass, right? Especially when you're growing fast and people are constantly changing. Comp management. And now there's so many more tools. So like all the tools and technology and reports, I think it's important to have a sales ops function, a person. But if you're leading the SDR team, or even individual SDRs, you don't want to. You want to delegate responsibility for things that you just shouldn't build, but you don't want to abdicate responsibility for how to get the data you need.
Yeah, I think with all the science that is coming at us, and I would say in the last 3 years, we've been given so many different options on how to automate and how to make more efficient. But I think that the art now is in how, what you select, how you stitch them together, and then how you provide a rhythm and emotion, and whether that's in the form of a playbook that tells your SDRs, your AEs, what to do, when to do it. I think the true artists are the sales operators, the marketing operations people that are now more and more coming together and figuring out, let's do an outbound motion together. Let's not marketing, you be the people that generate leads, and sales be the people that execute them. Get in the same room, define what an MQL is together, define what happens to that MQL when it gets prioritized and sent to an SDR. Decide when it shouldn't go to an SDR. Decide after an SDR has made the first couple of attempts and outreaches what to nurture that with, right? If there's this constant motion back and forth between marketing and sales today, and if they're not orchestrating the symphony that you're talking about, you're going to confuse your prospects. You're going to confuse your customers. And I think that's where kind of the artistry is happening. And, I'm fascinated with the technology, but at the same time, there's a lot of it. And now I think if I was building a company, I would take an SDR that's been in a really good operation for 1 or 2 years. And again, there were people on my team that were getting poached as much for the understanding of the operation that we had built for their role. There's a lot of bad technology decisions being made out there, but if you make the right ones, and then you can create this symphony between sales and marketing, you can get off the ground more quickly today than ever. And I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, well, the state of the world is overwhelm, and there's just going to be more of it for all the options, choices, content. So there's, I know people say buyers are more educated than ever. Actually, I would say buyers are more confused than ever. But likewise on the SDR side, there's more. I don't know if there was 500, sales apps 3 years ago, and now there's 5,000, and in 5 years it'll be 50,000. And that's just going to continue that overwhelm. So I think that, for a lot of companies, it's not about trying to find the perfect or best solution. It's something that's good enough that works. And there's no perfect tool. As long as there's something that helps you, like for example, even with a lot of the sales automation tools, there's like SalesLoft and Outreach and Yesware and, a trillion others. The automation, it's not even the automation or trying to simplify people, have reps do lower value tasks. It's ways to help simplify their day, because otherwise there's too many things to remember to do and to follow up on. So a lot of, I think, the role is using technology to how do you simplify, if it's automation or AI, it's like, how do you simplify things for people in sales? Because it's just, things are just getting too complicated, and we're trying to keep up with fight that with focus and simplicity.
Yeah, no, amen. Definitely.
I mean, you can trust me, like with dashboards, a lot of people put too many, like a lot of managers will put too many vanity metrics on a dashboard. Things that kind of look cool, but they're not really useful. But all those vanity metrics, which might be, I don't have one offhand. I mean, honestly, open rates can be a vanity metric if you are getting, results like appointments. And so sometimes they're useful, sometimes they're not. And you got on your dashboards, clean off all the stuff that's not really useful and focus on the few metrics that really matter to you rather than just trying to like put a whole bunch up because it looks impressive.
Right. I still am a big fan of, marketing, walking into and getting in front of a team of SDRs and saying, okay, people, what worked for you in the last 2 weeks? What leads did you really like? What events, what were the events and what were the assets that, that you followed up on that people tripped over that you liked? I think if marketing and sales spent more time together talking about anecdotally what worked and less time searching through, metrics, because you're right, they can be misleading. It's old school, but it still works. An SDR can sniff, and cherry pick the best leads. They'll look at a list of 50 leads and pick the 3 that they want, and they may not do anything with the other 40 stuff because it takes too much time. And so, that may be a lost art and something that, sales and marketing does more of. Sit together in a room and share a pizza and talk about what's working and what's not.
Yeah, so I would totally agree. And I had this conversation with the client this morning. Actually, even I don't know if anyone listening was at the SaaStr Paris, but I mentioned the same thing, which is the numbers on a dashboard are useful, but it's really more helping you identify where should you start to investigate in the business, right? What's working, what's not, what's changing. So the number is just a number. You want to find out what's behind the number. There's at that SaaStr Paris event, there's someone who said, we have 0% churn. And, that could be good, but that could be bad. That could be that you're being way, way too conservative with who you're signing up and just afraid, you're so scared of signing up someone who's not perfect that you're not growing as fast as you should, right? If your close rate if you had a 60% close rate, a win rate of your opportunities, that's probably too high. Maybe you're not charging enough money. Maybe you're being too safe, or maybe it's great, right? So it's the numbers, I think, are just more helping point you in the right direction. So it's where should you have those conversations with people to understand what's behind the numbers, why are they changing, or what should they be, and not be too dependent. It's not making decisions based on numbers, but using the numbers to guide you to where you should investigate. Old school way, face-to-face, or looking through the notes in the CRM before you make a decision, right? Using both, I don't know if it's left brain or right brain, but data and the manual digging, manual conversations that are so important. Yeah. To give you the background of it.
Amen.
That's right.
Hey, I want to change gears and sort of flip this to Lars for a second here, because I know you're a person that I imagine a lot of people come to for getting their company's initial early growth off the ground. So how frequently do you run into companies that either just do inbound or just do outbound?
In the beginning, there are a lot of companies that only do one or the other. But then as they grow and mature, not only in their, sales and marketing motions, but also their product stack, what they're selling, I see almost all of them specialize into 2 separate teams, inbound and outbound. And I think, I agree with Aaron. It's critical to have those 2 roles separate. They're so completely different in, what they do day in and day out that they have to. I typically go into a company when in the 4 companies that I've operated at in the last, 15 to 20 years, I came in and did the same 3 things when I came in. I came in as the leader, didn't have a team. So I outsourced SDRs for the first 3 to 6 months while I built up, my 2 to 4 SDRs. And then as I ramped them, I went down on the outsourced and then began to scale the team as a hybrid team with everyone on the team doing inbound and outbound. And then what happens is, quite naturally, SDRs will gravitate towards what they find easier and more enjoyable. And there are sales reps that just love inbound, not that it's easier or not, but a pre-qualified somebody that has read something, listened to something, read something, and wants to learn more is very different from sending a cold outbound email and catching someone's attention. And SDRs, I find, typically gravitate towards one or the other. And then if the company's growing and you've proven the model that you've been putting pipeline in the revenue, pipeline in the hopper, then you can go to the leadership team and ask for more. And at some point, it does make sense to specialize. And again, when is the right time? I mean, that's hugely dependent. But I think, inside sales, SDR leadership has to be conscious of when the right time is to specialize, because you don't want to miss that. Because there is so much, I think there is so much new revenue that can be made with these new outbound motions that a lot of companies, if they've never tried it, they'll never know. And I think they have to experiment, whether that's outsourcing or, peeling off a couple of members of the current inbound team and trying it. You got to constantly iterate and be entrepreneurial about this part of the business.
Does it feel like there's a window within a company's growth trajectory where they could almost be too successful with inbound that they might not believe that outbound would work? Because it's just they've got inbound dialed, and then you've got to start something new from the ground up. And it feels like, oh, I sent a couple emails and nobody responded, but I sent, with inbound, we're booking, 100 meetings a month, no problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, I sat and listened to this very webinar 2 weeks ago when Aaron was talking to the leader at Drift. And I remember him saying, why SDRs? We're doing just fine with, everything we're doing. And then it brings me back to the story of SalesSource.com. I mean, their first 5 years, their first 1,000 sales reps were inside reps. They didn't start the enterprise team until, 3 or 4 or 5 years into it. And again, back then, they were selling into the SMB, and it wasn't until they got to 6-figure deals where, relationships matter a little bit more. So yeah, I think I would love it if Drift were to peel off a part of their team and try to go after much bigger targets and see if they can get 6-figure deals. That's a pretty cool moment when that happens. And guess what? 6-figure deals turn into 7-figure deals. And now you have, what a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The only reason, there's a lot of companies who do. I've talked to them. They're like, yeah, we're inbound's working so well. Like, basically, why would we need to do outbound? And to me, that I'm not sure why it's like there are some companies that are growing so fast, they have trouble keeping up with that growth. And that would be really the only reason that you don't, we can't keep up with what we got today. But any company that has investors, at some point, that inbound is going to plateau. And you don't want to wait until your inbound leads plateau before you start outbound. Because by then, you're going to have, it can take, typically, including hiring, 4 to 6 to even 12 months. If sometimes you lose the right manager or there's like a problematic niche. It's not like you could turn it on in a month or 2 months and get consistent quality.
Well, Aaron, you said it when we kicked this thing off. Facebook is now doing outbound.
Facebook is doing outbound.
Right.
Yes, they are.
And there are a lot of founders that, I guess they would feel lucky if they were, the next Mark Zuckerberg, where millions and millions and millions of people, came in and started downloading what it is you have. But even that, like you said, has an end, and now they're trialing Outbound. Probably a pretty smart thing, and I would imagine they'll be successful.
Yeah, I mean, in HubSpot and Marketo, right? The companies that defined inbound marketing had big outbound programs, whether they like to talk about it or not. So, it's not if, it's when. Like, when is outbound the right time? And I mean, there's companies that are too successful with inbound. So on one hand, sometimes that means they take it for granted. On the other hand, when you do start outbound, if you've been very successful with inbound, there's a bit of a culture shift. And actually, Lars, I wanted to ask this about you, which is when you see a company, have you seen this when they're very successful with inbound and they start generating outbound appointments and the salespeople aren't sure how to handle those because they're so used to showing up and just doing a demo? Like, have you seen that, and what have you? How do you see them adjust to that?
So I haven't seen that because, and again, if the SDR has done his job right, then they are qualifying, a valid persona at a target company that we haven't penetrated before. So they are going to take that meeting all day long. Typically, the account is their account. They've been involved in some pre-call planning and been, they may even have directed the SDR to go and do this. That's the perfect world. Enterprise would make it. But think about makes me seem like more mid-market, where reps are a little more high, probably more inside. They're getting some higher volume deals. Maybe they're mid 5 figures, 20,000, 50,000. And they're not used to selling as much because they're used to be someone coming in. They want an appointment. They want to see the demo. They do the demo. Versus a company who, for the outbound, has been set up and they're interested. They're not really familiar with their brand or product quite yet. Okay.
They may not have been sort of bought into the vision, like the SDR pre-qualified them and there's a fit, but there's a sort of this adjustment that a lot of these salespeople aren't used to having to sell at the beginning of these calls. Probably more mid-market salespeople.
Yeah, and I have less experience with mid-market, but I would submit that if at the beginning of trialing this outbound motion, marketing and sales development and inside sales leadership got together into a room and decided together, we're going to try this. We need you to buy in. We need these sales reps. And again, don't boil the ocean. Take one of the teams or take 2 or 3 of the reps on the team, get them bought in so that when they do get that first, second, third meeting, there's learnings that are happening, and that there's, at the end of that first week or month, have the sales reps read out to everyone. Here's what I liked about it. Here's what I didn't like about it, and iterate and improve that process that you hope is going to then go to the rest of the team or the rest of the world. I think that many of us try things in a vacuum and we don't reach out across the aisle to the people that are involved. And in that kind of emotion, you got marketing, you got sales development, and you got outside sales. Come together and decide as cross-functional managers leading this charge that this is how we're going to do it, and get everyone bought in, from the beginning, and then grow it from there.
Yeah, and I think that's the point around when it's treated as some kind of like side project or hobby, and you don't have that kind of level of attention, it struggles, right? Versus when you do have those right people bought in and they're like working through the issues, and it can take months longer than you expect to really like dial it in. Yeah, it works.
Aaron, was your team one of the first teams at SalesSource that did the outbound motion?
Yeah, it was the first. We created from scratch.
Yeah.
I mean, they tried outbound in other ways, but didn't work. Like just cold calling. I mean, SalesSource made the classic move of, hey, let's hire a couple dozen field salespeople who have experience, and their Rolodexes will get us into big companies, and that didn't work.
Right.
Yeah. So they tried that. They tried outsourced telemarketing. They tried some just basic cold calling. So.
Yeah, that plateaus pretty quickly.
Yeah, so it was the first one that worked consistently.
It sort of brings up a comment that, Lars, you made when we were talking last week, that you feel like sales development deserves a seat at the table. And I know we just sort of talked about this, but I feel like it almost needs to be sort of brought up again, because it's so easy to miss the subtle point that you just missed, or that you just mentioned.
Yeah, so the table I'm talking about is the leadership table, right? That's the table where the CEO pulls together her or his senior executives on a weekly basis, and different members of the team have, read report outs. When I came to Cloudera 5 years ago, I told the CEO at the time that, if I'm going to come in, I'm going to want a seat at that table, not only because I want to listen and learn what's going on with the company, but I want to educate and bring you and the rest of the entire company into what is happening, at the ground level, right? I'm going to be building a team where, as a group, SDRs will have more individual conversations with our prospects and our customers every day than anyone else in the company will do, ever. And I'm going to have learnings for you and the rest of the team. I'm going to tell you what's working with our messaging. I'm going to tell you what's working in our demand generation marketing rhythms. I'm also going to tell you what's not working. Give me a seat. And again, you don't have to be a VP or even a senior director, but I think that leadership needs to bring in the leader of the sales development function, because there is so much learning and so much awareness that's going on from that team with the conversations that they're having every day with current and prospective customers. It's too important not to have. And so, the sales leader in a lot of companies, the SDR leader reports up to either the CMO or the VP of sales or the CRO. Man, they should want their SDR leader to be in that meeting, if not every week, at least once a month. And they deserve the respect. They deserve the visibility. This is also the team where if managed correctly, you're going to populate, not only in your sales organization, but throughout the entire company, SDRs that decide to do other things within that company. And I just think that if you're an SDR leader or manager listening to this, and you don't have a seat at that table that's regular, ask for it. And be prepared to have, to present 1 or 2 slides that give metrics that, that show what's working and what's not working. Come prepared, come with stories. I think it's deserving of that. There's no reason why the sales development, business development function should be, in a side pocket somewhere. I would demand it. In fact, I did. and I got it, and I think it helped.
Totally. It sort of builds on a question that Judd asked a little bit earlier in the Q&A. And this is a chance, everybody, we're going to take a few minutes. So if you're listening, you got questions for Aaron or Lars, hit that Q&A button and jump in right now. And we'll do our best to take the next, 5-10 minutes to burn through those questions. But building on what you just said there, Lars, Judd sort of asked, should SDRs be managed by sales or marketing, right? Do they roll up to sales, do they roll up to marketing, or do they roll up directly to the CEO in your new model?
Yeah, so I would say, and I've been on so many threads in the Modern Sales Pros Google group and have these conversations at roundtables. My guess today would be that 35% of SDR teams roll up to sales and 35% roll up to marketing. When I was at Cloudera, I rolled up to sales, but I exited Cloudera 2 months ago, and now my team has been handed over to and now reports up to marketing. Why is that? What do I feel about that? Frankly, I believe that the SDR team should report up to the leader that understands and cares the most about the function. And again, in some companies, right, it may be an SVP of sales, it may be a CMO, it may be a CRO, but the leader that cares most about developing and organizing and building that team That's where I want the SDRs. And in some companies, it's marketing. I know there's a lot of people saying today that because of all the account-based motions that are going on, and a lot of those get started in the marketing organization, that's maybe where SDRs belong because they become an extension of that strategy. I don't know. I think that sales and marketing need to spend more time in the same room together. Most of the sales and marketing organizations that I've been a part of where they worked really well, the two leaders, and they liked each other. They wanted to be with each other. In the organizations where I've seen them not be that cohesive, the leaders, the senior levels, they didn't really like each other, and so they didn't spend much time together, and so they didn't create energy with each other's organizations together. And again, I come from old school enterprise infrastructure software companies. I think there's, the companies that are getting funded today with venture are a lot more SaaS, high velocity, lower cost of entry, faster sales cycles, where, man, if you're a sales and marketing leader, now more and more they're the same, right? It's a CRO. But I think they have to spend way more time together.
Yeah, just to emphasize, the team, especially the early days, should sit under whoever cares about the most. It's true. It doesn't really matter whether it's sales or marketing.
Agreed.
Right on. So we got a question about the one thing that I think both of you admitted was one of the least fun parts of the sales or revenue operations, which is on territories. They're interested in how best to divide sales territories, especially as you scale from 2 to 10 to 20 plus sales reps.
I'll start and just say that, again, a lot of the companies that I've been at went from assigning territories out geographically to then pivoting at some point and then segmenting based on kind of enterprise or strategic enterprise, mid-market, SMB, segmenting on that. And in an enterprise, where you're selling something at 25, 50K or above that is land and expand, I think the selling motions into a Fortune 1000 are very different from an SMB. And so the conversation that I typically have is how quickly can you go away from geographic alignment to segmentation around, and it's not necessarily industry verticals, it's revenue bands because of the selling motion. For those of you that have read the Challenger sale, we all know that in an enterprise class sale, it's 5.7 stakeholders. I would submit that it's even more now for enterprise class sales, and for lower value. It could be one person, right? The one called close, the one demo, one called close for a 10,000K. So I mean, again, all this stuff turns out to be it depends. But I don't like geography. I like more segmentation around revenue bands if you're selling a product that can go into various segments.
Yeah. Well, I would differ a little bit, but I think ultimately you have to divide and conquer your salespeople in the way that makes sense for where you are, because usually where you end up at some point is you've got, small business, for most SaaS companies, small business markets, mid-market, enterprise, and maybe like strategic, or at least small, medium, large. And the enterprise tend to be more lists of named accounts because they could be spread over so many geographies. And the mid-market, often are geographic. So there's lots of times where geographies make a lot of sense, whether you start there or not. So I wouldn't think it's moving away from geographies, it's building on top of them. But sometimes for companies, it makes sense to start with industry verticals. Sometimes it's geographies. Again, it depends on, do you need enough specialty with one salesperson? Is there enough domain knowledge that to be effective at selling, that they really need to know healthcare or hospitals? Or can they be a bit more generalist? Salesforce.com, in the early days, they could be very successful. A salesperson could sell to, almost any kind of company. But as Salesforce grew and as the capabilities grew and there's more unique features to hospitals or unique features to finance, they added more and more verticals. So there's more teams devoted to just industries because you need so much more domain knowledge to be successful there. And there's so much more capability. So it's over time it evolves, but essentially you do need ways to divide and conquer your team that makes sense for where your company is and the kind of sale you're doing. If a salesperson has too much territory, they often just get confused, right? So that's why if you say, do not do this, because there's sales teams who do this, which is go out there and get leads and close them.
Yeah,
the sky's the limit.
Yeah, I would pile on and just say that oftentimes, depending on how long you've been operating as a company, some of those questions can be answered in the data. Take a look at your existing customer base. Do a churn analysis, cost of acquisition analysis, lifetime value analysis. Look at your current pipeline and understand where, there's velocity in the sales cycle. Is that industry? Is that geographic? Is that vertical, revenue band specific? I think that if you have clean data and you've been, CRM's been adopted, you can.
Now you're excluding 90% of people out there. So I'm kind of not joking, but
right, it's true.
It's true.
And the reason why I think revenue ops has become such a big deal. Man, you got to be able to go into your data and tease out TAM, ICP, CAC, LTV, churn. You look at that, and it'll give you a window into where you should try to focus.
Yep. And the problem with territory is the problem isn't so much dividing them; it's maintaining them as they change. And you hire salespeople and you redivide, and they're like this. Well, do they maintain? They've got prospects from before. Do they keep those? Do they hand them over? It's all like those transitions that get complicated. And usually what happens is salespeople get to keep a very small number of accounts they've been working that aren't closed yet, or they have 30 days or 60 days or 90, depending on and then they're done. And they got to move on to the new territory and let go of everything else that they've been working on.
Yeah, I'm a really big fan of give a sales rep the number of accounts you believe they can actively manage in any given cycle, whether that's a month or a quarter or a year, but then allow them to cycle out certain of those targeted or named accounts out because they're no longer they've been prospected to death and they're never going to buy, or they just bought the competitor or whatever it is, but then allow them to kind of trade in and out. I have 15 accounts. I'm going to give you 5. You can put those into an SDR, nurture or a, marketing nurture cycle. Give me 5 more. Instead of giving someone a geography and saying, you have 150 accounts, go, have at it. I think giving them that broad of a definition of a territory is detrimental, and you need to focus a sales rep. And what are the right numbers? I don't know, but I think there's an answer there.
I could just sit and listen to both of you talk forever, and I'm almost sad that we're coming. We got to bring the episode to a close. We have 2 questions. One's a bit longer, one's a bit shorter. I'm hoping we can get to both of them, but we'll see. So somebody just asked, they've been interesting hearing why an SDR should be a non-quota carrying role. Could it possibly be an influenced revenue quota from the account exec? So basically, should you comp SDRs on revenue generated, or should they carry that quota?
There is a model out there. A lot of people refer to it as the pod model. And with companies that, in my experience, that are mature, have gotten to scale, they will team a quota-carrying account executive with maybe a sales engineer or a customer success manager and an SDR, and they are responsible together for a batch, and they are compensated for what they as a team produce. So that's certainly one model. the SDR, ADR, LDR, BDR in our vernacular is a standard that I believe should stay a non-quota carrying role. I think if you get to the point where I think that you can graduate into an ISR, and an ISR, an inside sales rep, is a quota carrying role. And so I'm an advocate to keep SDR, beating the bushes, prospecting, and then allowing them to advance in their careers into a quota carrying role. And I think they learn the tenets of doing that from being aligned to quota carriers and taking on that, that pressure of, slaying it every day, every week, every month.
Because if you're booking meetings for an account exec, so much is outside your control. When you pass it to that AE, you're really relying on them to be a great closer. And if you're primarily comped on revenue and they're not a great closer, I mean, hopefully they're not going to be there very long, but
right.
There's so much that's out of your control.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the reason why I think, number of meetings. And again, there's a lot of discussion now on the modern sales pros about do you also compensate on conversions? Do you also compensate on closing? I'm personally in
no and yes.
What's that, Aaron?
No and yes.
Right. Well, I want, if an SDR has qualified and set up a meeting, I want them to go right back to what they were doing and get a second, third, fourth.
Yeah, it's really all about number of, accepted opportunities they've passed over, been accepted, and some percentage of what closes, unless it's a really fast sales cycle or really long sales cycle.
Right.
And this brings us to the last question, and I'll be sad to call it to a close. If we're talking about commission for account execs, or even SDRs, BDRs, ADRs, should we cap their commission?
No, not ever.
Yeah, never.
I thought that'd be a nice.
If you want to distance send someone, only.
Yeah.
Yeah. So big fans that go in uncapped, and then making sure that with the SDRs, they're not carrying a quota of revenue; they're carrying a goal of X meetings per month.
It's not only uncapped; you want to accelerate. If they get to the promised land of hitting their number, it probably won't be in the first half of the month. It'll likely be towards the end. Give them an opportunity to slay it and overachieve at an accelerated rate. It's not like you are, right? The SDR in the scheme of what you're paying AEs and sales, tenured sales engineers is a lot less. Give them a chance to kill it. You will create a culture where you'll get a lot more, and that goes along with any, easiest way to kill inbound flow of candidates into your company is to have, them talking about how you can't accelerate, can't make money.
Right on. Aaron, Lars, I want to thank you both so much. I feel like I learned a ton today, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks to both of you.
Thanks, Lars, and everyone who attended.
Right on. All right. See you guys.